Okay, look, the ring light and I were new friends. We're still working out our boundaries. But it's Scottish winter time, so we are forced to work together for the purposes of this video. Or you would never see it. Or me. Because this side of my head would just be darkness. Which is actually how I feel about a lot of the titles in this video. Darkness and only the empty sound of howling. It's Leanne and welcome back to another video. This video is a companion video to my worst books of 2022 video because I realised that I had too many DNFs for 2022 that I really wanted to talk about that I couldn't fit them all in one video. A lot of things sucked about 2022 and some of them are books. And in my worst books video I gave you a really sweet Elle with her Eggo waffles and a like stripy candy cardigan to offset some of the salt. But this time there is literally no attempt to keep the salt at bay, and so I thought that Hopper and his worldly sarcasm would be a perfect accompaniment for this video. And if you don't care about Stranger Things and my references are going totally over your head, then just appreciate my various array of cozy cardigans that are buffeting me against the anger that I feel about all of these books. Much like my worst books of 2022, I have several on this list. In fact, I think there are over 10. But unlike my worst books of 2020 video, which I think included all of the 15 books that I really did not enjoy last year, this video does not include all of the books that I DNF'd in 2022. Because you guys know that I am a very proficient DNFer, if a book doesn't capture me or it's really annoying me, then I feel absolutely no obligation to keep going no matter how I got that book, which has made me think a lot about how I buy books in 2023, but we will get onto that a little bit later in my goals video. But by then I think I will have run out of Stranger Things t-shirts. Does that mean I buy more Stranger Things t-shirts or does that mean I change my wardrobe? To be decided. Anyway, yes, this list does not include everything that I DNF'd in 2022, just the ones that made me ragey. So without any further waffle, let's get going. The first one that I have is one that I don't think I talked about at all anywhere on my channel in 2022, and it is Death in Croissants by Ian Moore. This one is supposed to be like a cozy mystery about a middle-aged English guy who has bought a little beautiful B&B in France and is desperately trying to run it but is actually just running it into the ground. I found this randomly in a bookshop on a half-off table and I read the first chapter of it literally out loud in the shop to Hare and we were both in absolute stitches. I purchased it immediately, we got into the car, I continued reading as we continued on our drive, and it was awful. What had seemed originally like quirky caricatures of Agatha Christie characters ended up just being like wooden fronts for the author's opinions on that type of person. And the author had a lot of opinions, some of them about the bodies and physical appearance of the people in the book. And by the halfway point I really did feel like that. I felt like it was the author who was telling me things through this like empty puppet of the main character who was essentially just the author. And although there were a few funny one-liners later on, I actually also started to lose the thread of what was happening because it's written in such a convoluted way that I was just like, wait, why have there's a bloodstain and they're doing what now? And it wasn't until I actually DNF'd this one and mentioned it to a friend that they were like, oh, Ian Moore is actually a comedian, and I was like, ah, that makes a lot of sense. It definitely gives stand-up comedy vibes where there are a few good punchy bits, but the bits that connect all of those bits are weak and flimsy. Overall, it was a bad time, and if you want this kind of cozy mystery with weird quirky older characters vibe, I say just read Richard Osman. Next up on my list was my very last try with Nicci French. I mentioned in my worst books of 2022 video that I tried 3 Nicci French books. 2 of them were included in the worst books because I read them all the way through, and then the last one is included here because it was a DNF. So you might remember I tried A House of Corrections and I really loved the plot and the setting and stuff, but I really hated the main character. And so I was like, okay, I will try Blue Monday, which is their long ongoing series, and again, I really hated the main character. But when I bought Blue Monday to try, I had also bought another standalone to try, and that is this one, The Lying Room. And this was possibly the worst of the 3 offerings because it is about an incredibly jaded stay-at-home mum. She's been married for like 20 something years, her kids are growing up and they don't care about her anymore, and she's just over overall completely miserable in her situation. But as with all of the other female characters that I have read from Nicci French, she's not just miserable, she's bitter. Every time I go into a Nicci French novel, I'm like, oh, okay, here is another new female character who has been put through a difficult set of circumstances. But they all come out with the exact same kind of footprint. They all really hate the men in their life. They all on the surface seem to have a really complicated relationship with sex and intimacy, but it's actually just a carbon copy of the other characters' same problems with sex and intimacy. And they all, no matter what, are more content to complain about their situation than actually do anything about it. And while I understand that in House of Corrections our character was actually trapped behind bars, previous to being trapped behind bars, she had a lot of choices to change things in her life and she didn't. And it just feels super lazy to me that although the plot is different, the character is essentially the same. And so I'm just gonna have to bow out of the Nicci French thing. I'm really sorry if you love Nicci French, because I know a bunch of you are like deeply devoted, especially to the Frida Klein series, but it just is not for me. Oh, this is another one that you guys are so passionate about, but just wasn't for me in any way. This is Jade City by Fonda, which is the first in the Greenbone Saga trilogy, and oh my god, I don't think I have been recommended a single fantasy book more since I started my channel. And I can see the reason why you guys think that it might be for me and are recommending it to me, because it has one foot in thriller and one foot in like mafia crime, and it's got a fantasy setting and fantastical elements. But I just didn't care. I actually hate mafia content in my books. I don't read crime books anyway, but specifically if I pick up a thriller and it says that there's mafia stuff in it, I literally don't even keep reading the synopsis. I just put it back on the shelf. You will never find me reading a mafia romance either. Well, except this one, which I'm definitely gonna read this year because I have a proof over there and it's Olivia Blake. But Olivia Blake does seem to be the exception to a lot of my rules. So apart from Olivia Blake, you are never ever gonna find me reading a mafia romance. And one of the other things that I don't particularly care to read about is drug trafficking in my books. Again, I really feel like that's a hangover from having read so much crime in like my early teens and very early 20s. So the setup for this one was already just not there for me, but also the execution of the first couple of chapters just left me really cold. Like, I went into it in good faith, willing to be proved wrong because so many of you love it so much, but I just felt nothing. I felt like I got a bunch of characters and a bunch of names thrown at me, but nothing in the character to actually like self-actualize themselves, nothing in the character to make me know who they were really or root for them. Just like, this person is connected to this person and works for this house, and I was like, okay, but what? And one of the things that people say to me when I tell them that I've DNF'd this one in sort of the first 30 or 40 pages is, oh, but you should really hold on, because by the last third of the book it gets really good, and the sequel's even better, and the world building gets great. But like I said before, I am a pretty proficient DNFer. If a book hasn't grabbed me in like 40 pages, I'm not making myself slog through the rest of it, especially because even though I know that it gets better, my brain is already like, I'm bored. So there's far less chance of me actually ever picking it up to give it a try again. So unfortunately, this one is a miss for me, and I am just going to have to bask in the glow that all of you guys have about it and accept that I am never going to understand the love. Speaking of things that have got one foot in crime that I haven't really loved, one of the books that left a really sour taste in my mouth this year was In the Seeing Hands of Others by Ogle. This one is billed as having one foot in thriller and one foot in crime, and it is about a nurse who has been sexually assaulted and has taken her case to court, but she has lost her case, and so the person who assaulted her has got off and is just back living his life like nothing happened, while she has to live with the consequences of how it has made her feel about her daily life. So it's a hard subject to start with, but it's a really interesting perspective. I had never seen that in a thriller novel before, where something had already gone to court and then we were dealing with the aftermath of a loss rather than a win at trial. But holy crap, there is a difference between saying this book is super dark and that it has really dark themes in it, and that the place that the main character is in is definitely a place of wanting revenge. But this one isn't just dark, it's soul sucking, and I feel like that is something that I have really discovered as a big problem for me in 2022. I mentioned it quite a few times in my worst books video. I cannot deal with a book where the only note that's hit all the way through is just bitter. Obviously our main character has massive cause to be bitter because of what's happened to her, but there's nothing else there. She doesn't connect to a single other person. Every single other character that she meets she hates and she treats them disdainfully. She works in a liver dialysis ward, so she works with patients who are actively dying or who are fighting to live, and the way that she talks about them is just freaking gross. She's horrible to her colleagues. There is a scene right at the very beginning where she is in a toilet stall and another one of her colleagues comes in, and her thought processes about them just ugh. And instead of being a book where a victim hates the perpetrator and wants revenge, it turned into a book where the victim hates everybody, specifically other women. Where you could just like see that the main character would be really happy if every single other person around her was suffering worse than she was. I've seen it a few times, specifically in domestic thrillers actually, that gave me very much the same taste as that, and I just did not enjoy. Another book that just made me feel look when I was reading it, and like not in a good way, not in like the I hate it, give me more, but in the like oh I hate it, take it away from me, it burns my eyeballs way. Hare House by Sally Hinchcliffe. I had a proof of this one which I picked up the minute that I got my hands on it because I was so excited about it. It was billed as like a modern day witchy tale. It was set in the middle of nowhere in Scotland. There's a bit in the blurb that's like as it turns from autumn to winter, creepy things start happening in the house that the main character is staying in, and I was like all of Leanne's ticky things all in the one place, please put it in my face now. And actually the synopsis is so like something that I would enjoy, that my poor lovely mum, who likes to try and blind buy me a couple of books every Christmas as like a challenge to herself, actually got me a finished copy of this one because she saw it and was like, oh, it's such a Leanne book. She does not actually watch my videos, so I don't mind saying here that I immediately unhauled it. Unfortunately, however, this one turned out to have a ton of truly problematic elements in it. For a start, the main character is an ex-school teacher, and some of the things that she says about teenage girls is just not freaking okay. There is fat phobia, there's slut shaming, there's just a lot of stuff in there that made me go, really? Are you sure? Are you sure you want to put that down on the page? Even as the character, are you sure that you want to have those opinions in it? Okay, alright. There were also quite a few not just problematic but directly harmful things said about mental health conditions and also about eating disorders caused by mental health conditions, and the suggestion that those things were for attention and were weaponized. And once again, I felt like it was really a case of the author accidentally showing their own views through the main character, because every single one of the characters in this was like a carbon copy of another character from another novel that was really like that, just without the actual emotions and the personality. I got quite far through this one before I DNF'd it, and I wanted to know what the conclusion of the like witchy elements were and everything that was going on with like the stuffed animals, and I looked up reviews and nobody can actually tell me. There's no clear consensus because every single review that hated this book was like vague, no idea how anything tied in, what were all of these elements to do with each other. And so I am pleased that I'm not alone in hating this book, but I am quite annoyed with myself that I let myself read so much of it before I gave up on it. We all make mistakes. Oh, and another book that I was absolutely desperate to like, and I'm so gutted that I didn't. This book has a perfect cover, it has a perfect synopsis, and the first couple of pages are great. I actually read this one for a try a chapter tag video, and I picked this book out of the whole stack because I was so excited about it, and it was just such a slow meander downhill into mediocrity that I was like, well, now I feel cheated and I have to unhaul it, which means I don't even get to look at the pretty cover anymore. And that book is A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. This is a YA thriller come dark academia come witchy novel, and actually it kind of fails on all three of those points. All of the relationships between all of the female characters in this book can be categorised by mean girls picking on girls who are a little bit different from them. Seen it before, seen it done better, didn't like it. On top of that, the witchcraft element really goes absolutely nowhere. A coven is established, they do rituals, but nothing happens. Everything is very elaborate and it's built for the aesthetic, but it doesn't do anything. It felt like Victoria Leigh just had 3 check boxes where it was like dark academia, witchy, thriller, let's tick off things from each column as I can fit them in. But it meant that none of them were convincing. And there was so little actual dark academia in this book. The characters were toxic, but not because of the dark academia setting or their relationship to academia or witchcraft in any way. Mostly just because they were all bitches who were needlessly horrible to each other or needlessly empty the entire way through. Some of them didn't really have any agency or opinions on anything. So yeah, I was very sad about this one. In fact, I was very sad about quite a few books from that try a chapter tag. That was definitely a failure of a try a chapter tag. Have to try a chapter again in a try a chapter tag and do better. Oh, to be on to that one now. The next one that I have got is The Castaways by Lucy Clarke. No word of a lie, guys, this book actually annoys me so much that just looking at the cover makes me like... I was really excited for this book. It was another blind buy for me. Every time I went into a bookshop, it was on a table near the door. Everybody was really hard pushing it. And usually thrillers that get pushed that hard fall into one of two camps. Either they're really engaging and entertaining and a huge amount of people have actually liked it and that's why they're now promoting it that hard. Or it's being promoted that hard because the publisher has taken a gamble, thinks loads of people are going to pick it up as their next summer thriller and they have millions of copies that they need to flog very quickly. I will leave you to decide which one of those is true by the end of this description. This book is about two sisters who have a huge argument before they go on a summer vacation together. The summer vacation is island hopping around a little chain of islands that you need to like get a plane to before you get another plane and you know. But as it is, they have a massive argument. One of them doesn't get on the plane, the other one does. The plane then goes missing. I was fully up for engaging and entertaining. That's what I wanted from this. I didn't expect it to be the best written, deepest thriller in the entire world. I just wanted it to be fun and it still failed at that. Once again, main character is one note bitter throughout the whole thing. She in fact checkboxes all of the bitter female character stereotypes. She has one night stands, she pushes away all of her friends and is a loner, she wears edgy clothes and she has a murder board. How much I'm not like other girls can you possibly make one character? Quite a lot it turns out, and all of it was here. All of it was in this book. I really wish it wasn't, but it was. And as if that wasn't bad enough, as if the main character who is doing the investigating wasn't bad enough, we actually get flashbacks back to her sister who actually got on the plane, and the entirety of her sister's monologue, the whole thing, is I am a single woman who is desperate to be a mother and I have no worth in myself whatsoever if I do not immediately produce children. When the freaking plane is actually crashing, when the like little sirens are going off and everybody's panicking and running for their seats and like praying and stuff, she is literally just looking at the baby that's in the seat in front of her and thinking, I will die and I will never be a mother and so my life has been pointless. And I cannot. It is 2023. It is possible to write a character who desperately wants to be a mother without making it the only facet of their personality. It is also possible to have a female character of a certain age who is single and is quite happy and is not interested at all in having babies. I literally threw this book across the room and it very nearly ended up in the recycling. Godspeed anybody else who picks it up is all I'm going to say, and no more Lucy Clarke shall there be on my shelves or in my library ever. Okay, not gonna lie, the next book on my list has a cover which actually makes me physically raging. When I see it, I have a visceral hit of I hated that. I hated it so much that I've actually wiped a good deal of it from my memory and I had to go back and watch my review of me talking about it to remember all of the reasons of why I loathe it so much. And I kind of now wish that it was just still wiped from my memory because it all came crashing back to me and it still makes me feel icky. The book that I'm talking about is The Push by Ashley Audrain. This was marketed to me originally by lots of people who love this book about it being a sort of creepy child book, which is something that I really love. Children written from an adult perspective for an adult audience who are just a little bit twisted or have something else going on for them. But this was nothing like that. Instead, what this was not a thriller at all, and it was not actually about a creepy child. It was instead an entire book about generational trauma, except it didn't tell you anywhere that it was about generational trauma, so there was absolutely no way to prepare yourself for it. The book is actually written in 3 separate timelines, and in every single timeline we are just following a different form of abuse on female characters. All of them are violent, all of them are sexual, and none of them actually really informs the next one in any meaningful way. So we're just following the exact same type of abuse being passed down through a family with nobody intervening or learning anything about it. What's more, the entire book is comprised of one letter from one character, so one of the points of view that you're getting is just this letter being written, and it is so freaking tedious. It is mind-numbingly tedious, and it is a lot of she said, I did, he said, I think, and there's no actual showing of anything going on. It's very sort of like writing 101, the thing that you shouldn't do, and the whole book takes itself really seriously. It's like the author thinks that she's having a very nuanced conversation about nature or nurture, but actually she's not, because in every chapter she's like, it's nature, look, it's nature, it just happens, it's in all of these people, this badness is in all of these people, and then in the next breath she's like, actually no, also nurture, there are environmental factors, let me show you them. The whole narrative is set up for that discussion, and it's really pointless because she proves again and again and again that there were no other fates for these women to have except for what happened to them, because it is in the nature of both them and the men to get into these situations. It was just gross. It left me feeling really horrible, and I just don't get it, because this is another one like The Silent Patient from a few years ago, which is just so deeply problematic and troubling, but has a huge legion of people who really love it and really promote it and are very behind it and are very quick to jump on people who have a negative opinion about it. And then there's an entire other league of people who have given it like 2 stars and are just simply in their reviews like, this book is trash, don't read it. But none of those opinions ever seem to actually get voiced out loud. So here is me voicing my opinion on this one out loud. I really hated it. So much so that I really honestly mean it, that when I scroll past this one on like my Goodreads challenge page, I'm like, ugh. Next up, another one that I tried that was completely out of my wheelhouse, but I was so convinced by you guys to pick it up. So many people were like, I love this series. I don't know why I love this series. There's just something deeply magical about it that like got under my skin, and I think that you would love it. And that's a really hard recommendation to not take and run with immediately. But I really held off. I held off for as long as I could, because I had a deep suspicion that I was not going to enjoy this as much as you guys enjoy this, and I was proved correct. The book that I am talking about is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Now this is the second YA fae book that I have read this year, which has bitterly let me down, the other one being House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland. And at this point I've had a few people say to me, oh, you just don't like fae books, but that's not true. I like fae books just fine. In fact, I love the Mercy Thompson series by Patricia Briggs, although I haven't talked about it in a long time. A lot of those urban fantasy novels are deeply based in fae and fae mythology, and I love those. So I promise you, it's not just that I hate books that have fae in them, it's really specifically that I hate these books. I just didn't understand any of the motivations of any of the characters in Cruel Prince. This book starts off with a really brutal murder and then a kidnapping. It's not a spoiler, that happens in like the first 10 pages. It's a pretty horrific, shocking thing to have happened, and yet years later when these kids are teens, they are still living with their kidnappers, and for some reason Jude is just happy to be there. She's not only like living with the people who slaughtered her family, but she's in an extremely vulnerable position, because as a human in the fae realm, she can have glamour done to her and she can literally be forced to do anything that anybody wants, and yet she's still there. Everybody is absolutely horrific in this book. Like, everybody is horrible to each other, but people are primarily horrible to Jude, and yet somehow she just continues to take it as like a badge of honour. And when it comes to these characters who are being so horrible to each other, there are just too many of them. There are too many names, there are too many descriptions thrown about, and there's never enough time for that name and description to marry itself together in your brain before you're whisked off and you have to care about somebody else with another motivation somewhere else. That's what I feel like The Cruel Prince boils down to. It's like Holly Black had so many ideas for this huge world that she was unable to edit them all down. It means for me that the plot is really convoluted and most of the characters are kind of superfluous to it. They're just there for window dressing. They may as well just be world building, to be honest. And one of the things that gets so frequently said to me when I say, oh, I really didn't like that novel, especially the romance, is that I just don't get the tortured bad boy who needs redemption thing. Like, I just don't get the, oh well, he's a diamond in the rough and he's been really bashed and abused, and so therefore he needs help to be a better person thing. I'm wearing a freaking Hopper t-shirt, guys. I love me a damaged, grumpy man who can be made to feel again, and I don't mind working for it. And I love that in romance and in thrillers and, you know, anywhere else. I would argue that a lot of the male characters that I'm drawn to fulfill that brief. It's just that Carden's an arsehole. He is so full of red flags that if you take his skin suit off, he will literally just be the colour red. There are so many things he does that are dodgy and not okay. He treats Jude so badly, and it also left me feeling really icky, and I noped my way out of it actually quite close to the conclusion of the book because I just couldn't do it anymore. Second to last on my list, we have a book that I picked up completely at random. I was in Toppings, it was on one of their like signed first edition tables and I had never seen it before, but every single thing in it was like, that is a potential Leanne book, and that is The Schoolhouse by Sophie Ward. It's about a woman who went to an alternative school when she was younger that promised a kinder and more inclusive way of learning for children who were a little bit different. And I read that and thought, ooh, that sounds vaguely culty, I'm in. But instead what I got was not vaguely culty, but instead massively ableist. The school that this character goes to is actually a school which takes in children with disabilities from underprivileged areas, and because these parents are generally from working class backgrounds and are in poverty, they see this school as being a private school and so therefore of a higher standard for their children. But actually what's going on in the school is that these kids with disabilities are just kind of being convinced to overcome them by the power of sheer will. Very early on there is a scene from the little girl's perspective where there is a young boy who uses a wheelchair who is brought into a circle of children who are all told that they should clap for him to encourage him to walk without his wheelchair when he is very clearly in pain and has a very like serious disability. And the problem isn't necessarily in the content of the book itself, because obviously some of the perspectives in it are set up from an adult's point of view who has left that school and who knows that that environment was abusive, but instead in the way that it was actually presented, because there's no direct critique, at least in the first half of the book to where I got to, about what has happened to these children. There's no actual straight up, this was wrong, this was a bad thing that happened. And the reason for that, I think, is because the author does a really common thing that I see when seeing children written from an adult's perspective for adults, which is that the author automatically starts dumbing down that part of the book as if they are writing for children. And I feel like if you're going to offer that as part of a narrative, if you're going to show that straight up abuse as it's happening, then you have to offer something to counter that, a critique of that, or a way of showing how that trauma is being handled as an adult in the adult world. But it just never happened. The parts never married up for me, and it just always felt vaguely like the author was writing 3 different books and never found the through line to make them all feel cohesive. I just don't know how at the editing stage of this one it wasn't sort of pointed out that all 3 of these different sections didn't even really have the same prose style to pull them together. It felt like an idea that was in an early draft stage rather than a fully finished novel, and it felt like it needed a lot more in the way of sensitivity readers before it was actually published. And finally, I saved the saddest one of this bunch for last, the one that I know that all of you guys have been waiting to see which list it it actually turned up on, and it wasn't on the worst books list, so it had to be on this one, and that is The Family Remains by Lisa Jewell. I am still not over this. I am still not recovered. I am still not okay about what this book did to me. I still feel so bad that this was such a letdown. So you guys know that I am a devotee of Lisa Jewell. I really do think that she's one of those thriller authors that manages to make every book different from the other. And The Family Upstairs, to which The Family Remains is a sequel, is one of my favourite thrillers in the world. But I was really worried when I saw that this one was going to get a sequel, for a couple of reasons. First of all, because The Family Upstairs ends on a really ambiguous note, and I think it's delicious. It's perfect. So many thrillers are all tied up in like a nice neat bow with everything solved at the end, but this one doesn't do that, and I was worried because it is a completely different skill set to write a standalone book that's perfectly plotted and wrapped up, and write a series of different books with the same characters where you show character progression but have different plots. And unfortunately, that I think is one of the first things that let this book down, because as soon as I picked it up, as soon as I read the first couple of pages, I was like, those are not the same characters that I read in the first book. There is a time jump, and so some of the things have obviously changed between the two books. There are, you know, a progression in some of the relationships, but they didn't feel honest because of that. I didn't believe the progression that had been made, and there was no like backstory or little infilled pieces of information. She never like showed me how we got to that point, and because of that I just didn't believe this sudden closeness that some of these characters had. One of the main characters is completely different from the way that he was portrayed in the first book. He was like really dangerous, really deceptive, really difficult to pin down, and he was nothing like that in the second book. He was just a pedestrian character who I felt like I had to get to know all over again. On top of that, and again trying to be very vague because I don't want to give any spoilers, that character is actually a queer character who is followed through from the first book. And unfortunately, where in the first book I felt like it was handled really well, the second one was not like that at all. He was a complete gay stereotype. Every like middle-aged gay man stereotype was given to him. It was kind of like rewatching Queer as Folk, which was really relevant in the 90s because we had never seen any kind of like queer culture portrayed on screen. It was like Lisa Jewell had watched that and had just used that as her footprint and had never updated any of her knowledge on the queer community anywhere, and we have so much more access to information now. There are just as many types of queer people out there as there are types of straight people, and it really didn't feel like that made it into this book, and it not only disappointed me, but it left a really bad taste in my mouth because I was like, all of the good work that you did in that one, you've just erased in this one. Top of that, we are given a completely new perspective in this book, which doesn't exist in the first one, which I don't hate, because of course it's a different plot, so I don't mind that we've got a new perspective, but it's a completely irrelevant story that doesn't need to be told. It's about a character who's vaguely referenced in the first book, and it's like giving her a redemption arc that nobody asked for. I was buddy reading this with Jean, and we were sending voice notes back and forth about this one, and she was also disappointed in quite a few of the aspects of it and quite shocked at the tone change. And then of course when I DNF'd it and started talking to you guys about it, there were a lot of you who were in the same camp as me, so at least I know that it's not just me that's thinking it on this one. But still, this was my most anticipated release of 2022, and it was a DNF, and there was just something poetic about that when it came to 2022. And luckily I had some really great reads after that which kind of made it better, but nothing is going to remove the bitter taste that I have in my mouth about this one. Wow, it left so much of a bitter taste that I then just had a massive coughing fit when I finished that one. It was so bad it choked me. I am still so sick, you guys. Thank God for the power of makeup. It's makeup and Hopper that's getting me through, that's what it is. So that's it. Those were my DNFs of 2022 that made me angry enough that I felt like I had to tell you about them in a video. As always, once again, the start of your wrap-up videos are my favourite time to ask this. If you had any books that you bitterly DNF'd in 2022, please tell me about them down below. And if you DNF'd any of the books on this list, I want to hear about it. And if you think I'm wrong about any of the books on this list, then I also want to hear about that, because opinions live here. If you are new here and you have had 2 extreme doses of salt and you would like a dose of sweetness, then please subscribe for my best books of 2022 video coming to you very soon. And if you have enjoyed this salt, if it has once again been good for your pores, then please consider hitting that thumbs up button, because it really does help my channel. I will speak to you all again very soon, guys.